I mean, who would know that so far this year in 2020, more than 4.5 million people have died as a result of tobacco? I guarantee none of your listeners know that. And it's because we don't get it out there.
Welcome to the Things You Can't Unhear podcast. I'm your host, Maritza Barone. In this show, I will introduce you to ideas, concepts, and mindsets that will open your mind to a new world of well-being and personal life growth. Through eye-opening interviews, we elevate people in the world doing amazing things for humanity and share insights that will shift you to become the happiest, healthiest, kindest, and most compassionate version of you.
Hello and welcome to the Things You Can't Unhear podcast, and thank you for tuning into this episode. Now, if it's your first time listening to the show, this is going to be a brilliant discussion. So many of us need to hear. Dr. Bronwyn King joins us today, and I've been scheduled to have her on the show for several months now, so I'm thrilled to finally be able to have her here with us. For those who don't know yet, Dr. King is a radiation oncologist and founder of Tobacco-Free Portfolios, which is a non-for-profit organisation that works with the largest financial organisations to drive global change towards tobacco-free finance. In 2010, Dr. King discovered that the default options on her superannuation fund included investment into the tobacco industry, and she was unknowingly investing in the cause of the problem she and her fellow health practitioners were trying so hard to fix. It was then she knew she had to act, and that is exactly what she has done and has been on a mission to do for the last 10 years. I've invited her here today to share how she set out on this journey to make these significant changes between the dysfunction of the health and finance industries, and how this pivotal moment in her life has led her on her new pathway to change millions of lives. So welcome to the show, Dr. Bronwyn King.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Now, we should touch on how you are and how you're feeling and how you're dealing through COVID-19 and this pandemic that doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon right here, especially in Victoria, where we're both located.
That's it. I'm joining you. That's it. I'm joining you today from Melbourne, and yesterday was the worst day that we've had in the pandemic so far. So, look, it's everyone in Melbourne's a little bit miserable right now, and I must admit that I'm definitely part of that. I think it's a really tough time. It's very different to lockdown number one. I think there was more community spirit and buy-in, and I felt like people really thought it was going to end. Now, being a medico and also being very interested in public health, I knew very early on that this was going to be a very, very long-term thing. But now it seems that, it seems like there's very little disagreement about that globally. And for Australians who have enjoyed just such an amazing quality of life, especially in Melbourne, I mean, we're so lucky here to have such an incredible city. So it's just been devastating to see that city just a shell of itself, and it doesn't seem to want to end, and it's going to be many months, many years before Melbourne's anything like what it previously was. So it's tough, and I find even some of the most resilient people I know are having very dark days. So to anyone out there who's feeling a bit down, do try to, look after yourself, keep smiling, get out there and take a walk, and try to remain as connected as you can be with, your family and friends, because it really is tough for every single person.
It's a very, very tough time. And I'm grateful today that the sun is shining, because that definitely helps my mood and elevates me in some type of way. But, going out there and enjoying the sunshine, but going on these walks and wearing the masks that we're made to wear right now, it's so confronting in so many ways, but we just have to get through this together. And I don't know. I mean, the resilience that you were talking about, that's really important to moving forward. What practices and beliefs have helped you over this testing time?
Oh, look, I'm very lucky that I'm an optimistic person by background. I think that a little bit of my DNA has optimism in it. So I'm definitely a glass half full kind of person. But I have done some different things. So I have tried to make time. I've got 2 little boys, and every day we try to go for a bike ride together. Now, I was not doing that pre-pandemic, but every day we try to go for a bike ride. It's just a half an hour bike ride, but it gets me out often in the sunshine. Even if it's a bit cool down in Melbourne, it's often sunny, which is great for the good vibes. But probably my piece de résistance was last week. I embraced Christmas in July. Now, I have never done that in my life, but I highly recommend more Christmases. I think that it was great. It was a great distraction. We went out and, we bought all the food. We had a nice big meal, and we had little gifts for each other. We put on the Christmas music. We had tinsel everywhere. And I've never done that. But I have to say that it was a nice way to just have a little moment where we focused on something else, something positive. So I've definitely been, I would totally recommend that. And the other thing I've been doing is I've been ringing my friends more. I think that in probably the past 10 years, I've hardly rung. I used to go and have coffee, or used to go and have dinner, or used to have a family catch up, or we'd go to their house or whatever. Clearly I can't do any of that. So I have been doing a lot of phone calls, a lot of texting. And I have to say, isn't humor amazing at this particular time? I mean, the memes have been outstanding. They're so funny. And so I'm
favorites.
Oh, so many. Maybe I can send some in so you can link it to the podcast. But I think that there has been remarkable humor. And so buy into that, tap into that, and try to surround yourself with anything that brings a good laugh.
Humor and staying connected. I think they're both great and phenomenal tips that we can take forward with us. Thank you, Dr. King. Now, I'd love you to share your story from your words. I know I introduced you with a bit of a background into the pathway you've been on over the last 10 years, but I'd love our listeners to hear it from you and find out that new purpose that you're on to halt investment in tobacco companies, as it's such a powerful story.
Okay, well, I mean, I think I'm going to put a couple of little extra elements in the story so that you can really understand the complete picture, because it really was a stepping stone after stepping stone that led me to where I am today. But just a little bit of background to start off with is, hang on one tick, and of course, homeschooling going on here. We've just been interrupted.
That's okay.
Sorry, yeah, I've been interrupted to be given a picture. So we all just want to
beautiful
for that, and he didn't close the door. All right, great. Anyway, so it is a beautiful picture. Go Ollie. Now, so let me go back. So my younger years, so when I was a teenager, I was a swimmer. I was an elite swimmer. I swam for Australia for some junior Australian swimming teams. I didn't crack a major team, but when I grew up, I wanted to be a champion swimmer, and I learned an awful lot about life through elite sport. After I got a terrible shoulder injury, I retired, but I did end up reconnecting with sport. I was the team doctor for the Australian swimming team for 10 years. And being involved with the Australian swimming team, that super elite performing outfit that it is, it really taught me an awful lot about achieving things, high performance, how to get up when you've had a bad day or a bad race, amazing teamwork. And it taught me a lot about the word impossible and how people can indeed do things that often everybody else thinks can't be done. And so with that background, I studied medicine and became, I studied medicine, and I went to Melbourne University, and the very first job I had after I graduated, I was 25 years old, I worked on the lung cancer ward at Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre in Melbourne. So this huge cancer centre. And there I was on the lung cancer ward. I was the classic, shiny new doctor planning to save the world. And I went to work every day for 3 months, and all of my patients had this devastating illness. Lung cancer is a terrible illness. The outcomes are very bad. Only 15% of people are still alive 5 years after being diagnosed. So it's a terrible illness. And nearly all of my patients were smokers or ex-smokers, and nearly all of them had started smoking when they were teenagers. Most of them had tried to quit at some point. Nearly all of them regretted it deeply. And despite living in this beautiful country with all this amazing medicine and sophisticated technologies, nearly every single one of my patients died. And I was that person at 25 years old, ringing up people in the middle of the night saying, look, I really need you to come in really quickly because I think your brother's going to pass away tonight. Like, it's it. You need to hurry. Please hurry. And sometimes people would make it in, and sometimes they wouldn't. And so sometimes, often I was the one sitting there watching people die. And I was watching people who were in their 40s, 50s, 60s. You know, these are people who had so much life and love to give and had beautiful families, and people that you know, if you sat with them, you would recognize your own mum, your own friend, your own dad. And so for me, it was just this extraordinary experience. And I thought, gosh, you know, everyone knows tobacco is bad, but really we don't see what it is doing. We just don't see it. It's just not on the front page of our papers every day. We haven't got these huge numbers in our head. I mean, who would know that so far this year in 2020, more than 4.5 million people have died as a result of tobacco? I guarantee none of you listeners know that. And it's because we don't get it out there. So of course, you know, there's many, many other terrible causes of death, but tobacco eclipses everything. By so far, you know, it's just daylight and daylight and daylight is second, third, fourth and fifth on the list. So with that, I went on and specialised in radiation oncology. So, and unfortunately, tobacco is everywhere in cancer medicine. So tobacco is responsible for 1/3 of all cancers, 1/3. And so I'm qualified as a radiation oncologist 10 years later. I'm again working at the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre, this time as a specialist. And my husband and I decided to buy a house. And we sat down with our accountant, and the accountant said, look, you two need to sort out your money. How much money do you have in your super fund? And I just sort of shrugged my shoulders. I had no idea. And to be honest, I actually thought that was a pretty boring question. I mean, who cares about super? Really, you know, it's not that exciting a topic. But I'm a very obedient person. So the accountant said, sort yourself out. So I did. So I went and sat down and met the representative for the super fund for all of the health staff at Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre. And we had a meeting at the cafeteria. And this was March of 2010. And he brought along all this paperwork. He showed me how much money I had. You know, like a good Melburnian, I had a latte. You know, we had a nice chat. And then I just shook his hand and left, and the meeting was finished. Completely as an afterthought, I rushed back to the table and I said, oh, by the way, was I meant to tell you what to do with that money? And he said, no, it's all taken care of. You're in the default option. And there was just a pause. And I said, oh, option, you know, does that mean there are other options? And he looked at me and he rolled his eyes and said, oh, look, there is this one greeny option for people who have a problem with investing in mining, alcohol or tobacco. And then there was silence. And I said, did you just say tobacco? And he said, yes. And I said, so are you telling me I'm currently investing in tobacco? And he said, oh, yes, everybody is. Wow. And that was my moment. I just thought, I just can't let that go. That just makes no sense. And I realized straight away that it wasn't really just about me. It was a much bigger problem, because how could all of the staff at Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre go to work every day trying to help people suffering as a result of tobacco, and sometimes we don't help them very well. We're not able to, because the outcomes are so bad. So we watch a lot of people suffer terribly and die. And then at the very same time, my money and the money of all my colleagues was investing in the companies that made the products that were killing them. It just made no sense. So I haven't really slept since.
Of course. I mean, you can't ignore that. That is a life pivotal moment that if you are, as a medical practitioner and someone who's so passionate about health, that's not something that you can walk away with and walk away from. And so what were the next steps there? What happened in the next few months after hearing that?
Well, the very first thing that happened was I said to him, can you just tell me, what am I investing in? You know, just give me a list or something. Because in 2010, like, most super funds didn't even have websites back then. So the concept of, you know, having a really transparent view on what your money was doing was really in its most sort of early form. So I just said, please tell me. And I'll never forget, 2 weeks later, he rang me and I was on a ward round and I scribbled down just what he said on a piece of paper. And he said to me, look, it's in the international shares portion of your portfolio. And for me, that was about 50% of all the money I had was invested in international shares. He said, your number one holding is British American Tobacco. Your number two holding is Imperial Tobacco. Your number four holding is Philip Morris. And your number five holding is the Swedish Match Company, which is a big tobacco company in Europe. So four of my top five holdings were tobacco companies. And that was really it. I just thought that's just so badly aligned with everything that I live for. I just cannot accept that. And I knew that my colleagues would feel the same. And so I first of all, I raised it with the CEO of the hospital. And 24 hours later, he rang me back and he said, right, I've booked you in to present to the CEO and the investment team at that super fund. That super fund doesn't exist anymore. It's merged into other ones. So that then, of course, meant that I needed to learn quick smart about finance, because I had no background in finance at all. So I didn't sort of speak the language. I didn't understand the system or the regulations or anything about the environment whatsoever. But I put together this nice little presentation, which was very doctorish. Of course, that's what I did. And a month later, had what turned into my very first meeting with executives at a big financial organisation. And it was a pretty tough conversation back then in 2010, the concept of sustainable investment or responsible investment or sort of transparency in investment was really very, very new. And so it was a very difficult conversation. And also I was very naive in the way I presented it. In a way that was an advantage though, because I gave them a totally fresh perspective. And so to cut a very long story short, 2 years later, I mean, after I'd presented to the board and had many discussions with them, they decided to go completely tobacco free. And that fund is now First State Super, one of the biggest funds in Australia. And following that, the CEO of First State Super felt great about making this decision. And he very kindly really helped sort of mentor me and introduce me to lots of people in finance. And so in Australia, there's now 50 super funds that have completely tobacco-free finance. And they control almost $1.5 trillion of Australians' money. And so because our pension sector, our super system in Australia is so big, this was a great case study to share globally. So the next step was we took some steps globally. In the first place I ended up was in Paris. And I ended up working with AXA, one of the biggest insurance companies in the world. And less than 1 month after I met them, they made the decision to get rid of $2.8 billion worth of tobacco stocks. And they felt great about it. Their chairman joined our advisory council. And by this stage, tobacco-free portfolios was up and running. And I was doing less and less medicine and more tobacco-free. And then we opened an office in London. We started working very broadly across Europe. We worked with the biggest pension plan in Europe. They went tobacco free. And then we were very happy to work with the biggest bank in Europe. And they stopped lending money, investing money and insuring tobacco companies. And their CEO felt great about it and joined our advisory council. And so I guess one important thing to mention there is that we have really embraced the mantra of we name and fame when we work with people. We name and fame, which can seem a little bit of a shock for some people, because often when you create change, people think, oh, you know, name and shame them, name and shame. It's just the thing to do. But actually for us, we really totally avoid that and take a completely different path. And it's worked very well, because when we sit down and inform finance leaders about tobacco, we tell them a bit more. I mean, why would they be experts on tobacco, for goodness sake? You know, it's just not in their area of expertise. But when we sit down and have very professional diplomatic discussions with people about tobacco and tell them some key facts. So for example, probably no one knows that the #1 ocean plastic is cigarette filters. Would you know that? I mean, most people don't know that. Most people don't know that there are 16 countries that use child labor to grow tobacco leaf. You know, once you start learning about these things, in addition to the catastrophic health impact, it's very hard to do nothing. And so we found that that name and fame style has worked really well for us.
I love that you're leading with optimism and positivity, and it makes a huge difference. And it's incredible to see what the passion and mission of one person can achieve. It's just mind-blowing to think that if you didn't walk back and hear that comment after you had already left, none of these changes would have been made potentially. Have you always been supported by your colleagues and your other medical professionals that you work with, transitioning or taking time away from what you do medically to put it towards tobacco-free portfolios? Has there been judgment there at all?
Oh yeah, definitely. Early on, to be honest, it was very tough, because in the world of oncology, really, the only people who are really respected are those who produce lots and lots of research. And certainly in the academic centres, you know, there's huge pressure, particularly on the junior staff. And I was I was a consultant back in, so I was a specialist back in 2010, but only a pretty new one. And so there's a lot of pressure to produce research. And my problem was I don't actually like research that much, and I'm not very good at it. And so I can do it, but my heart's not in it, and it's not the best that you'll get out of me. And I knew that. And so I was kind of looking for something that would be a much better fit for me. And I'm sure your listeners know of the concept of ikigai. Have you seen? I need to send you. This does need a picture. I should have come with pictures to show, but I can maybe send you a nice picture you can put beside the podcast. But the concept of ikigai is when it means sort of the reason, the reason of life, or the way you live, the best purpose of your life. And it's a crossover of what you are good at, what the world needs, what you love, and what you can be paid for. And in the middle of those four sort of circles is this tiny little point where they just all intersect. And that is ikigai, just this perfect place for you. And so I think, without knowing about that concept back then, I was looking for my ikigai. I was looking for the spot where I belonged. And I knew it wasn't going to be medical research. So I was looking for something. And so when this came and sort of I made that discovery, even right there in the cafeteria, I can still distinctly remember going, this is it. This is it. I think I can have a crack at this. And the great thing about finding that really beautiful sweet spot is that it doesn't really feel like work. It feels such a pleasure and such an interest. So in those early days, I just couldn't help myself. On the weekends, on Saturdays and Sundays, I was reading about finance and reading about sustainable finance and working out who's doing what and who wasn't doing what and who were the champions and who were the laggards. And I just couldn't stop it. And so then it started to take over my daily life, and some of the doctors at the hospital were very critical. But when the very first fund, so my fund, First State Super, when they went tobacco free in 2012, that day I received an email from the professor, the head of the lung cancer ward. And he wrote this email and it said, congratulations on this big announcement. It's great to see First State Super go tobacco free. This is great. By this action, you will save more lives than in an entire lifetime as a clinician. Exactly. Keep up the good work. And once he said that, for me, it was just like this little shield. And any time after that anyone was, critical or really down on me, it just didn't matter. I just thought, you know what, Professor Ball thinks this is a good idea, so it probably is. I wouldn't say that, but I would think that. And it really showed me the power of mentorship, because sometimes in life, especially in the digital age, we feel like we have to get 1 million likes or 10,000 followers to be worthy or for our idea to be a good one. But what this whole story has shown me is that one person is enough. One person. If you have one person to back your idea, especially if that person is someone you really respect, that's enough. That's enough. So I really encourage people, whatever your idea is, or whatever your dream is, one person to back you will work just beautifully.
That is so inspiring to hear, I think, for so many of us listening to you right now. And those feelings and those little breadcrumbs that are left for us along the way in life, I think that we need to stand up and take notice of them. And I love the fact that you were aware, you knew you were looking for that thing that was going to shift you in a way. So you had your eyes open, you had your heart open, and it came to you and it was there, and you've changed millions and millions and millions, probably billions of lives through the work that you've done. And it's like you just said, your professor hit the nail on the head. You could never have single-handedly done this working as an oncologist in theatre or with your patients. It wouldn't have reached that impact. So I'm sure, like all of the people listening today, they are incredibly inspired, as much as I am. Now, you stated some statistics a little bit earlier, but when we're comparing, I had a look into the stats before you jumped on today, and is it 8 million people dying a year from tobacco use?
It's crazy, isn't it? It's 8 million. So 8 million people die a year from tobacco. Those are completely preventable deaths.
Still happening.
Pardon?
That's still happening.
That's still happening, actually. So it's gone up. So 3 years ago, it was 6 million. Then 2 years ago, it's 7 million. Now we're at 8 million. It's just insane. It's more than 22,000 people every single day. How's that for a number? Here we are watching COVID number every day, it's 22,000 people. So it's just an enormous number of people. And I think that it's just one of those things that we've sort of tuned out to a little bit. But that's really the essence of what we try to do, is just talk about how, while this problem seems too big and it's been put in the corner and everybody wants to ignore it, it shouldn't, the size of the problem and the complexity of a problem and the challenge of a problem shouldn't turn us away from it. It should mean that we meet that challenge with increased courage and increased effort and increased attention. That can seem very hard. And certainly with tobacco, I mean, this problem is not going to be fixed in my lifetime. So that's a bit depressing, isn't it? But the thing is, if we do nothing, then it's going to be even worse. So I often think of it as this massive curve, because the big tragic statistic is that the World Health Organization has predicted that the world's on track for 1 billion tobacco deaths this century. 1 billion. There's only 7.5 billion of us. And so I always think, there's this graph going up to that 1 billion number, and we're here. And I think if we can just change the angle of that graph a bit today, 100 years later, that can mean that you can potentially save tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of lives. So I'm not going to see that in my lifetime, but hopefully my children or grandchildren will see that. And so the aim is to bend the curve a bit.
Exactly, and we're very familiar with that terminology.
Exactly.
Flattening curve. Well, why aren't we informed enough? It almost feels like a 10 years ago problem, or 20 years ago problem, because years back the packaging had been changed, the prices have gone up with buying cigarettes. It feels like that's the stopping point, and the stopping of the sale of them is never actually going to happen. That's where it feels like they're always going to be available for us to purchase. Do you think that's ever going to happen in our lifetimes? Do you think they will be completely banned from being purchased?
There's a lot of push for a tobacco-free generation, and so that's an idea where you select a point in time and say anybody born after this day. So you could choose my boys, for example. I've got one who's 8.5 who just did that drawing. Now, anyone who does that drawing shouldn't be allowed to buy a product that has a 66% chance of killing you. Surely we would agree on that. Now, he was born in 2011. So there we go. Could we say everyone born in 2011 onwards no longer has access to this deadly product that would never be allowed today? So, if a brand new product was coming onto the market today, and we knew that product would kill 2 out of 3 people who used it, if we knew that product used child labour in 16 countries to make it, if we knew that product constituted the #1 ocean plastic, I mean, there's just no way we would allow this to happen. So we've got to sort of somehow transition from what we would do today if it was a fresh product to understanding that this is a legacy problem. And we've now, so in Australia, there's about 2.7 million smokers. 90% of them regret that they started. Nearly all of them started when they were teenagers and children. So most of them are simply addicted to the product. So we need some kind of transition in there to try to, make sure that the next generation doesn't fall prey to the same industry. But the biggest barrier by far is the interference of the tobacco industry in everything, that in every anti-tobacco measure that is unrolled everywhere on the planet. And even though people hear about big tobacco and think, oh yeah, they're bad, since I got involved in this work, they're 100 times worse than I imagined they would be. It's really very, very, very sly and difficult. So for example, most recent example is we launched our new website 5 weeks ago at Tobacco Free Portfolios. And 10 days ago, someone from the UN Tobacco Control Treaty, the head actually of the Tobacco Control Treaty, sent me a note saying, did you see this new initiative of a tobacco company? I won't name which one, but I looked at it, and they've got this fancy new website which has got exactly the same sort of hero image that we've got on our website. And it looks like we're linked to them. I mean, it's identical. It's the same picture. And so they've got this brand new initiative, and it looks like it's ours. So, they love to create confusion, create doubt, and it's just, they're very, very difficult. They're associated with almost every government in the world. There's government links that shouldn't be there. And so I secretly dream of becoming the Prime Minister just to sort out a few things, because I think that might actually be what is required really strong political will to just fix a few things that should have been fixed decades ago.
You've certainly got my vote, and you have that Jacinda Ardern personality to you that I think would be so great in leadership in Australia. So,
well, I'm very tempted, and if I was even 1% like Jacinda, gosh, wouldn't we be in a good place? So, she's such an outstanding leader, and I think she's been a great, just a fantastic role model for a leadership style that resonates so strongly with the community. So, yeah, bring on as many Jacindas as we can get.
She's so authentic and real, and allows herself to be vulnerable, and her delivery of her messaging and her strength is second to none. I'm a big fan of hers as well. I can see you standing up there.
No, I'm not. No, I was nodding.
No, I can see.
You can see me standing up there. Oh gosh. Well, yeah, I mean, gosh, it's another whole conversation, isn't it? Politics. If it wasn't so brutal, oh my gosh. But I mean, I feel, especially during the COVID era now, it feels like it feels like power is very, very concentrated right now. It feels like if you're not the Prime Minister, you probably can't get anything done everywhere in the world. And obviously I'm watching American politics extremely closely, day by day, minute by minute. And, the November election is approaching, and never before have we seen how important it is to have a leader who really cares about people in COVID. It's, we're actually making decisions about the price of life and what we'll trade off to save people, and our respect, especially for the vulnerable. It's a really interesting time when people's colours are shining through very brightly.
Absolutely. Well, it's so interesting to see how life can take unexpected turns and lead us on these pathways. And I can see that, there's potential for that to go into other directions for you. For people listening, how has this changed your life, and how do you recommend to others to go after these things that light them up?
Can I just tell one little story that probably underlines that? Because the biggest thing that ended up happening for us so far, and the most remarkable experience I've ever had, was after our work started to go quite well in Europe, my first colleague at Tobacco Free Portfolios and we started to get invited to these global events where global challenges were discussed. So we got invited to the UN during the UN General Assembly. We went to these events on sustainable fishing. We went to these events on sustainable finance in all its different ways, on human rights. And I started to see that if there were these major global challenges, that you needed to sort of be on that circuit, because this is where all the decisions were being made. And everything was going well. It was the end of 2017, right before Christmas. And I said to my colleague, I rang her up and I said, look, everyone else seems to be having an event at the UN. Why don't we have one? And she said, yep, why don't we have one? I was like, all right, good, let's make that happen. I then emailed 3 heads of 3 UN agencies and asked them if they would partner with us to have an event at the UN in 2018, in September, during the UN General Assembly. And I honestly thought that there was about a 1% chance that one of them might say yes. But 2 days later, all 3 of them wrote back and said, yep, we'll partner with you. And I was like, oh my gosh, amazing, okay. And then I reached out to all these business leaders who had joined our advisory council, or people who had been very complimentary of our work. And I said, if we had an event at the UN, would you come? And they said, yes, everyone. So January of 2018 rolls on, and we're having our very first phone call, people all over the world, to organise this event that was only 8.5 months away. And I was getting very excited, saying, oh, this is amazing. This is going to be great. We're going to have this great event at the UN. We're going to launch a new initiative. It's called the Pledge, the Tobacco Free Finance Pledge. Everything's great. And then one of the heads of the UN agencies, he said, Bronwyn, you do know if you're going to have an event during the UN General Assembly, you need a Prime Minister and a President to sign off on your event. And one of them needs to be from the G7. And at that point, I sort of went, oh, well, actually, no, I didn't realise that I needed a Prime Minister and a President. But I then reached out afterwards to all of these great French organisations we've worked with. And 2 weeks later, the CEO of the biggest bank in Europe, from BNP Paribas, a French bank, he said to me, what do you think of this letter I've just sent? And it was a beautiful letter that he had signed with 3 other CEOs of major French organisations. And they wrote directly to President Macron, asked him and his team if they would meet with me when I was next in Paris 1 month later. They did accept that meeting. So I went off and met with Macron's top advisor. I explained the whole thing. He said, oh, President Macron's going to love this. Just go home, sort this out with your Prime Minister Turnbull, and we're all in. And so it was like, okay, as if that was going to be an easy thing. On the way home, I dropped in at a big anti-tobacco conference in South Africa, and I met with Dr. Tedros, who everyone knows now, the head of the World Health Organization. And I explained what we were doing, and he said, yep, I'll come with you. I'll come to your event. I went home, and it was extremely difficult trying to get to Canberra. But finally what happened was that President Macron was coming to Australia in May of that year. And his team in Paris put our event on the agenda to be discussed with Mr. Turnbull. And so I ended up randomly getting invited to a dinner at the Opera House with President Macron and Prime Minister Turnbull. I met the President of France. He did sign off on our event. So did Mr. Turnbull. And there we were, September 2018, at the UN with Dr. Tedros, with all of these high-profile people, launching our pledge that we invented just in this little room that I'm in right here in Melbourne. And now that pledge is our global flagship initiative. And there's now 141 organisations from more than 20 countries, some of the biggest financial organisations in the world that have signed up, and they control more than 15 trillion Australian dollars. Now, none of that was meant to happen in my life at any point. So
what was it?
Well, maybe it was, I don't know. But, you know, I went from being a doctor, just seeing one patient at a time each day, going to a clinic, just like a normal doctor. And then suddenly I was flying all around the world, meeting presidents, prime ministers, CEOs, heads of UN agencies. Also our global ambassador is a princess. I highly recommend you get a princess on your team. We have Princess Dina Murad of Jordan, very handy to have that. She's amazing. And so, you know, you mentioned earlier about being open to opportunity, and I think that really resonates with me. My first colleague in tobacco-free portfolios, Claire Payne, once we were having a chat, and I said, I don't know where I'm going with this. You know, I just don't know what I'm doing. And she said to me, just keep stepping forwards. The path is forming under your feet. And I just thought, oh my gosh, what an amazing quote. Just keep stepping forwards. The path is forming under your feet. And I often reflect on that and think about that, because the truth is I don't know exactly where I'm going, but opportunities come, and I take them if they're there. It is risky. And so I've had to embrace that certain sense of insecurity. You know, of course, I could have a very sensible, secure life by being a doctor, but I don't think I'd be making even 1% of the impact that I can potentially make with this work. And also, I don't think I'd be nearly as happy or as excited or as energized or as, you know, truly fulfilled by the work that I do this way. And so I think it, you know, to your listeners out there, if you're not, you know, if you haven't got a spring in your step in the morning, if you are not really driven by what you're doing, or if you know there's something better for you, have a crack at it. You know, just have a crack. And even if you fail, or even if you know, have to take a sidestep here or there. I mean, my whole life has been full of sidesteps. I've never got from A to B in one go, ever, 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 never. I've always had to take a little deviation and a little hook turn and a little step to the right and a little twirl over there. All of that is fine. All of that is fine, and it makes for a super interesting and rich and exciting life. So if that's what you want, I would say to people, you know, take a deep breath, fill yourself with as much courage as you can, and step forwards.
You're certainly living your destiny. When you were telling that story, I could just visualize the pathway being formed for you, and you walking through, and just things, just obstacles just falling away from you, allowing you to come through. And it's just so evident in your face, me looking at you now, how lit up and inspired you are by doing the work that you're doing. And that is what so many of us are looking for, is to find that light, to find that purpose. So enjoy it. Speak about it as much as you can. I know you already are, and I'm so excited to be speaking to the future Australian Prime Minister.
I just love that. I'd love to do it for just a little bit.
Start the campaign.
Yeah, start the campaign. All right, I'll have a think about that.
What were you like as a teenager or a child? I'd love to know sort of that, if that personality is sort of blown through into your adult life.
Well, to be honest, I was a spectacular nerd at school. So I really wanted to do well, and I loved, you know, I have a very, very scientific brain. So I loved maths, and I loved numbers and figures and science. I genuinely loved it. And so I think that, that side of me was always sort of there. But really, when I was a teenager, I was a swimmer. If you had said to me at the age of 14, what do you do? I would have said I swim. I would have talked about the fact that I was in year 9 about half an hour later, but I would have talked about I swim, and I just wanted to get faster and learn which muscles needed to be faster, or needed to be stronger, so I could swim faster. So I was always very driven, very disciplined. I was probably a bit too hard on myself back then. I think I'm a bit kinder now. And, back then, if I didn't do perfectly well in things, I was devastated. And also I probably didn't realize how transferable skills could be. So that might also be a nice message for some of your listeners, in that, early on, I was absolutely devastated that I got this very serious shoulder injury and had to give up competitive swimming, because when I was young, I just thought, gosh, the one thing I'm any good at has been taken away from me. This was my one chance to do something great in life, and it's gone. And I was absolutely, gutted that, there I was at 17 years old, and my dream had just been crushed. And what I'd love to do, if I could go back and speak to 17-year-old me, is say, you know what, that is very disappointing. It is disappointing. But just think of all of the amazing skills you've learned about discipline and about teamwork and about what it's like to do great things, and then the next day what it's like to have a bad race. How do you get up and overcome that? But that all of those skills that I'd learned from competitive swimming, I immediately was able to transfer into studying for medicine. And those skills I've then immediately been able to transfer into working with the business community. And so one of the most stressful things I ever did in my life was do a TED Talk. So I did a TED Talk in 2017. I prepared for it for 3 months. I prepared for it like it was an Olympic 100-meter freestyle final.
I have watched it. Brilliant.
And right beforehand, I was about to go on stage. There were 4,300 people in the audience, 12 cameras, no notes, one shot. And I just wanted to do such a good job, because I thought, gosh, this is such a great opportunity to get my message out to a massive audience, much more than I could ever do any other way. And right beforehand, I'm waiting behind the screen, and I started to jump up and down and shake my arms in exactly the same way that I used to do before I got up on the blocks before 100 meters freestyle. I didn't think about it. I just did it. And it made me sort of laugh at the time, going, oh my gosh, what on earth am I doing? But it was just this innate reaction. And it showed me that there I was 30 years after I'd stopped being a competitive swimmer, using exactly the same techniques. And so I'd really encourage listeners not to worry if what they want to do is quite different to what they've currently done, because the experiences they have will always stand them in good stead for whatever it is that comes next.
I'm Maritza Barone. Thank you for listening to the Things You Can't Unhear podcast. I'd love to keep the conversation going. Let us know what you thought of this episode, and if something really profound came up for you that you want to share, let's talk about it. You can find me on Instagram at Things You Can't Unhear, or on my personal page at Maritza_Barone. And if someone you know will benefit from something that was said in this show, make sure you share it with them too. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and keep up to date with what's next. And if you can spare a few seconds, please rate and review the show on iTunes, just so other people can find us more easily and quickly. And as always, my friends, be happy, be healthy, be conscious, and be kind.